Welcome to Entrepreneurial Entrails for some short stories on the guts and glories of being an entrepreneur.
Short people got no reason. Short people got no reason.
Hey, it's Elizabeth Plouffe, and welcome to Entrepreneurial Entrails. Today is Ballsy. So Ballsy is my... I'm sure if you've listened to this before, this is repetitive, but what can you do? You have to listen for those who are here for the first time. And so Ballsy is the women in entrepreneurship group that I started a few months ago, and I'm looking to grow. And I recently partnered with Women in Tech, which is a group through Silicon Halton here in Halton region. And Tuesday night, after an extremely long day, we had a workshop. Well, not so much a workshop, more like I don't know. It was our regular group, but my friend Norine Jones is the CEO and owner of PowerVac Services in Hamilton. And about 2 months ago, Norine and I were having a conversation at the Ballsy breakfast, and it was about, the different experiences that women have in business versus men. And it's not like a Venus and Mars thing, and I have talked about this conversation before, but so my friend Hazel was there, who is the co-organizer for Women in Tech, and it was a really interesting conversation. And so Hazel asked Norine to be a speaker at the Women in Tech Ballsy combo event on Tuesday. And one of the reasons I'm talking about it again is because even though the conversation was had between Norine and Hazel and I that prompted her to come in and speak, I ended up with 6 pages of notes because of the way the conversation unfolded. So there's a few lessons learned here that I want to share with you. Typically the structure for this event is we get together. There's a local bar called the Ivy Bar and Kitchen. Really nice venue, great food, and they have a private dining room. And I've held events there off and on for the past probably 3 years. And so they're really terrific about letting us use that room on a regular basis. Come in, catch up, order dinner, clear out the business, introduce ourselves, all of that good stuff. And then the speaker takes the floor. And typically the format is the speaker, just does their thing for a certain amount of time. And then it's Q&A after. And what I really loved about this format this week was it became an organic conversation versus a presentation. And luckily, Norine's she's very confident, she's very quick on her feet and intelligent, and she was able to go with that. And she had some key points that she wanted to cover, but she also allowed for this organic conversation to take place. And so I just wanted to share with you some of the notes that I took, some of the key points that she feels women struggle with in business. And, some of the main ones were being less apologetic about being successful. And I know I struggled with that for a little while, which was really strange. But anyway, because I don't lack in confidence. Women's worry about being perceived as lazy. And to backtrack a little bit on that, this particular topic was more about women in typically male-dominated industries. And Norine, I did a podcast with her about PowerVac Services and what she does, and they do mold abatement and removal and hazardous materials and what have you, not typically a female-dominated industry. And so we kept going on about be bold enough to make the job you want so that you can be happy. So if you are working for somebody and you're in a male-dominated industry, don't be afraid to speak up and say, you know what, I could do this and I'd be better at this job and it's better for you. It is harder for women to call bullshit and speak up, which is a shame. I don't particularly suffer from that problem, which is probably why I didn't do well in corporate Canada. But anyway, and one interesting point that came up during the conversation was the difference of, man and wife, right? So my husband works for the City of Toronto. And the difference between our two situations, because I'm an entrepreneur and owning my own business, is that I have to do what I have to do because my position is sink or swim. His position, specifically, more so because he works for the City of Toronto, is, you just got to do what you got to do to keep your job. And it really, and I'm not dismissing that by any stretch because both are important, but I think the pressure is different, and I think the perception around the role is a little different, which was really crazy. And one of the biggest things that came out of this conversation on this first page of 6 notes is when you're dealing with your family, and this is as a female business owner, entrepreneur, you have to look at the decisions that you make that impact both your family and your business from a logical perspective versus an emotional perspective. And one of the stories that got shared by somebody in the group, and any story that I share other than Norine's is going to be, anonymous to protect that person. So somebody shared the fact that they had to go away for business, and she really questioned whether she should go because the business trip fell on her son's birthday, and she didn't want to miss her son's birthday. And he's turning 9. So, it's not, I'm not dismissing the birthday by any stretch, but it's not a landmark, right? But she did have that question about whether she should go on this trip or not because of the impact on her family. And so consequently, she had a bit of mom guilt and, made all this extra stuff and the lists and da-da-da-da-da. And her husband's more than capable of taking care of the situation. This was driven by her, not her family. And so Norine cautioned that when you're looking to make a decision about your business and it impacts your family, you really need to take a step back from that role of mom and remember that you're an entrepreneur as well. And if you aren't careful, the emotional part of who you are as a parent can negatively impact your business. And I found that really telling. So let's just have a look here. There's some really fantastic points, and it was a reasonable level of expectation for knowledge within your industry. One of the points that had come up is that if you're in a male-dominated industry, I'm not sure that it's society-driven versus self-driven, but you could have that perception that you may not be seen as knowledgeable. But what is reasonable? How much learning should you do to make sure that you're up on top of everything? We talked about mental barricades. We talked about women dealing with the after effects of being tough. So when you have to fire somebody, when you have to have a disciplinary issue, when you're negotiating or what have you. And a really interesting point was made that the more you have to do that, you become desensitized, and not in a negative way, but in a way that you can deal with it easier and understand the value and the impact on your business versus the shit, I have to be not a nasty person, but you have to maybe go outside your comfort zone for what's acceptable for a woman boss. We talked too about the top 3 ways to succeed in a male-dominated industry, and the 3 ones that came up, not just from Norine, but from the whole group, was conveying knowledgeability, good Lord, that's not the way to do it. Convey knowledge, that you are knowledgeable and trustworthy. And actually that trustworthy word leads into another thing. Focus on the relationship building. I mean, women are quite skilled at that. I'm not saying men aren't, but we have an advantage that because we're women, and Norine's story was, she was dealing with a client and it was a guy, and he was more than willing to just hand over his keys to his house and walk away. And in Norine's experience, if it had been a man that had shown up to do the job, that probably wouldn't have happened. The inherent trustworthiness assigned to women is a real advantage in these types of industries. And have the confidence, back to succeeding in a male business, have the confidence to ask for the sale. And that's where a lot of entrepreneurs, regardless of sex, fall down. But I think women in particular view that as a really ballsy move, and sometimes will, I don't want to upset and I don't want to be too pushy, and they have to worry about that perception. So you know what? You have a family to feed. And if you're willing to look at how your business impacts your family and remove that emotional component, then when you're out there hustling and grinding and doing what you got to do for your business, don't be afraid to ask for the sale. I'm getting better at that. I'm going to very strongly coach people I know to get better at that, because you can't afford it. You can't afford not to grow a pair and ask for the sale. So let me just keep going here. And one of the things that we did talk about was, if a client disrespects you because you're a woman, what do you do? And interestingly enough, that was a really hard one to answer. So I'd be really interested to hear your feedback. And we all know it's okay to fire a client, but in particular, you know, I was in a meeting with somebody a few years ago, and it wasn't a client, but it was a situation I'd never been in before. And we were discussing, you know, why a project wasn't moving forward. And this person looked at me, and pardon my language, but looked at me and said, okay, who's the cock block? Just, yeah, I kind of paused for a moment because I'll be completely honest with you, I really wasn't sure what the word was. But by the stunned reaction of everybody else in the meeting, I gathered it wasn't great. And I had to say, I don't know what that means. And then it was explained to me. Then I called my husband and asked him what that word meant. And initially he laughed because I didn't know what it was. And then he got really mad because he's like, who used that language in a meeting in front of you? And it was done intentionally. It was done to shock me. It was done to put me off my game. And it was done because I was a woman. And I can say that with confidence. So if that was a client, I think I'm fairly certain anyway, that I would be confident enough to say, you know what, that kind of language, not okay. If it happened more than once, I would fire that client. There's obviously a disconnect between the services that I'm offering and what that person, how that person is willing to control their behavior. And I don't have to put up with that. Nobody does. But I found it really telling that we had a real problem coming up with solutions on how to handle something like that. So I've got some other stuff that I'm going to put in the blog post, like I say, 6 pages, that are tips and tricks on what we learned about, you know, regardless of working in a male-dominated industry, but just being an entrepreneur in general. And, you know, if you've got any feedback about your experience being a woman entrepreneur and solutions that you've come up with or what have you, I'd really love to see your comments. You can get in touch with me on Twitter at MCVPlouf, and I'm going to shoot it out there, you know. As a woman, have you run into anything that's been blatantly sexist? And if so, how'd you handle it? And as a guy, have you ever been in a situation where you've watched a male colleague, you know, intentionally go after a woman in business? And what did you do? Did you stand back and just kind of go, you know, this is awkward? Or did you stand up and say, you know what, buddy, that's not okay? And if you did, congrats. If you didn't, apparently you also need to grow a pair, because it doesn't matter where it's coming from. That's not okay. And that's pretty much it. It was just a great session. Really looking forward to the next one. This has prompted a lot of topics that we're going to continue to follow up on and do some problem solving with. So it was great. So you can catch up with me. My blog, where I'm going to post all these tips, is Rub Elbows with MCV Communications. And just know that you have the guts and glory to make your own story, which I would love to hear more about. And that's it. Hope you're having a fantastic day, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.